All right, so I showed 3 different ways to get started. You can use base painting, kind of quickly mapping in the shapes and colors to fill up the shape. You can use sketching, and you can use either freehand sketching, like I did here, or you can do rotoscope sketching, which is basically tracing your shapes, but try not to get too bogged down in details, on top of your reference. So now this is what's fun. Notice how my base color does not line up with my rotoscope, and my freehand sketch doesn't line up with either of them. Because this is digital, I can turn off the rotoscoped layer, and let's see, I can turn on my base color layer and unlock it. And now I can make my base color layer match my rotoscoped layer just by hitting Command T, because this was painted at 100%. Right? I can kind of stretch it to fill the space, and I can see that my observations were pretty much correct, but we don't have perfect, alignment. So notice how the back of him, he just got a little bit wide. So how can I fix that? I'm not going to erase. I'm not going to use the lasso to cut it out. I could do that, but what I'm going to do instead is right click and warp, and then just tuck in these shapes a little bit. Now, why do I think this is important for my process? Because the spontaneity, the energy from those first marks you make in a sketch give a lot of energy and life to a painting. And I don't want to lose that. Right? Now everything matches pretty well except for the tail. Right? And so all I need to do now for the tail, I'm going to hit return, and then I'm going to just grab it with my lasso. This is why we study compositing in the beginning of the class. And then I'm just going to transform that and warp it to fit with the rotoscope a little bit better. All right, so now my base painting lines up very well with the rotoscoping. Now can I do that with the freehand sketch as well? Let me lock my base color. Let me unlock the freehand sketch. And then let me line it up. Transform, bring it on, make it bigger, fill the space, rotate it a little bit. Yeah, my freehand sketch matches pretty well, but then in some areas, like I made the feet go too low. Actually, no. I made the tail a little bit too small. Yeah, so I basically made the same kind of observational mistakes with my freehand sketch that I made with my shape painting, my base color painting. So now those are lined up, right? And do you see how they each tell you something about the source material, right? Now this is what I love about digital painting, is I can make my freehand sketch layer a different color. And I'm just going to do that by going to Image Adjustments and playing with Hue Saturation. And I'm going to make it, let's see, on the cooler side. If I really saturate it, it's going to be kind of those greens and those blues, those cyans. And then I'm going to make my rotoscope sketch on the warmer side. So I'm going to go to Image, Adjustment. And the reason I'm able to do this is because I didn't use black. I used something with a little bit of color, so now I can play with that color. I can push it. Really saturate it. So let's go warm. These kind of orangish reds. I can darken them, I can lighten them. Maybe like that. All right, now let me fade them into my base color a little bit so that they're helpful. I'm just going to take their opacity down. So that's one way I can kind of integrate them into my base color. And now I've got a kind of energetic base sketch to play with. But I can also play with, here I'll do it with the rotoscope sketch, with blending modes. So I'll do it at 100% just so you can see this more clearly. It's a fun technique. Basically, I take my traced lines, but I don't want them to be so heavy. I'm going to sink them into my base painting a little bit by using a blending mode, like letting the lighter color show through, or overlaying them, or darkening it, right? But overlay works well. Soft light could work well. Pin light could work well. Yeah, I like pin light. Then maybe take its opacity down just a little bit. Then I can do that with the freehand sketch too. Let's try it in overlay. No, it gets lost a little bit too much. How about with, yeah, pin light. And I'm going to take its opacity up. All right. So far, so good. And then at any time, I can go in and I can warp these different layers. I'm going to silence that. Okay. So basically, I've just shown you both of these approaches and then layered them together. But this leads me to my next step. What if you didn't start with your base color layer because you were a little afraid to, right? Maybe you just started with your freehand sketch layer. Well, then what would be your next step? You would do a base color layer on top. And I'll show you the mistake that students make. You would use your brush, but you would use it at 100% opacity. And you would use it fairly large. And even though you spent the time sketching this, either freehand or rotoscoped, you now want to grab your colors and be willing to just block it out completely. Kind of like a paint by numbers. You're not going to get the edges completely right. So what's the mistake that students always make? Well, they'll be tentative. I'm trying to get you to be brave here. And so what they'll do is like take the arm here. They won't go all the way up to their edges. They'll just fill in inside of it like this. Like they're doing a coloring book as an adult and they're being really careful not to go over the lines. And the problem with doing that is you're not covering up the whole silhouette, right? Then your base paint is basically leaving a whole bunch of empty gaps. And that's not that helpful. So what do you want your base color to do? You want it to fill everything. Okay, so once you have your base color and it's completely filling everything, and how can we check that? Turn all of those on. I'm going to unlock my base color layer. I'll show you how we can check. I'm going to turn on the rotoscope layer, if you did one. And then I'm going to color overlay. And if there are any gaps in it, then you know that you don't have a full base coat. And sure enough, I've got little gaps in it. So how can I fix that? I mean, they're tiny. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my base color layer. I'm going to use my magic wand with contiguous turned on. I'm going to select outside of it, right? And then I'm going to say, select the inverse. And I'm going to go back to my white background. And then I'm going to hit Command J and duplicate that. I have to unlock it first. Command J, duplicate that. So what do I give myself? I give myself a base layer right on top of my white. I'll turn off the rotoscoping so you can see it. That is basically like a primer layer in the shape of my paint, right? And now all of that is filled in. And the stuff that wasn't on my base paint layer, I can now fill it with a color. And I'm going to use something that's kind of the opposite of the orange, right? So this green works pretty well. All right. So you see how that kind of fills in the gaps. All right, now I have got base paint. So I'm going to lock all of these other. Remember, you only need 3 layers, but you can add as many as you find helpful. So I need the blank white behind. I need a base color layer, and that's this one. I'm going to lock that now. That's at 100%. All these others are optional and can be turned on and off, but they should be locked if you're not painting on them. So now we move on to the refined paint layer. Now, for my refined paint layer, I like to do something else. I like to add to my blank white background another new layer, and I like to fill that entire layer, edit, fill with middle gray. Because refined paint is going to be about the shadows and highlights and different colors. And gray is just a better base tone. Like already I see that I can go lighter and I can go darker. So I'm going to lock that. So that's optional. If you want to just paint on white, you can. At the end, when I turn this in, it's going to have just a white background. Okay, now for refined paint, what's the basic idea for refined paint? The next video will be all about this. But I am going to refine my surfaces, and I do that with a brush, but it's different than the base color brush, which was like this, right? 100% big and thick, because I'm going to make it a smaller brush at a lower opacity, around 60% opacity. And a slightly softer edge, smaller size. Now this is just with a basic brush. I'm going to teach you in the next video how to make your own brush for this. But how do I blend? This is always the question for students. Because my base color looked pretty good when I was zoomed out, but when I zoom in, it looks awful, right? This looks very, very artificial. So how do I blend? How do I blend a color like this with a color like this, right? Well, if I'm not painting at 100% opacity, when I overlap the two, it gives me colors that are in between. And then I can paint with those. And that will start to give me more complexity. But when you're using just a standard brush, you'll see that mixing those colors that way, by just painting with lower opacity and then letting them blend into each other, right? And then stealing the colors that you get from blending and then blending out with those over and over. See how that's all blended now? But with a standard brush, it looks pretty boring, especially as we get right into it. Doesn't look like real paint. And that's why I like to have, kind of looks like AI paint, but it doesn't look like real paint, right? That's watercolor. Here's oil paint. I want all that kind of complexity to it. So instead of using just a standard brush, we're going to use a customized brush. I'll show you the customized brush I made before, right? Brush looks like this. But I'm going to show you how to make one. And then when you use a customized brush, you control the tip, but what really matters is a new thing that we're going to learn, which is called the brush settings. Brush settings you can find under Window. It's also right here in the sidebar. And the most important brush setting, the one I'm going to teach you, is shape dynamics. So with any brush tip, you can set it to have a size jitter. So it's not always locked into just the exact size, which makes it look artificial. You can set its control to be based on pin pressure for its size. And then you can play with the angle jitter, and that's going to make the most difference. So now it's going to look more like a real paint stroke.